So, sorry for the technical hitch over there.
No
Now,
problem.
we'll discuss the topic metabolic acidosis and nutritional status along the following outline, consisting of the introduction, the pathophysiology of metabolic acidosis, the intricacies of metabolic acidosis, its consequences, and nutritional status, and finally, the management. So to begin with, let's look at what is acid and acidosis. So simply put, there are multiple definitions of acid and how people have looked at understanding the chemical composition and function of these things. But Arrhenius, the oldest and the simplest form, simply says that if you have a solution that has a lot of H plus ions, that's an acid. How do you measure that? By pH. And pH is essentially nothing but the concentration of H plus to its logarithmic power, a negative logarithmic power. So as I said, acidosis would be anything or human body or any state where there is too much of H plus. Now, chemically, the range of pH can be 0 to 14, but biologically, a very small part of this is actually compatible with life. So a normal pH is from 7.35 to 7.45. And mild deviations on the either sides can cause acidosis and alkalosis, and slightly more can actually be fatal on either sides. So it is very critical that a normal pH in this range is maintained. How does the body achieve that? Because there's going to be always an addition of an acid or a base depending on what you eat, and of course the internal milieu of the body as well. So there are different buffers in the body which see to it that the pH is kept in this tight range. The most important of it is the bicarbonic acid and bicarb system, or simply put, the bicarb system, which is nothing but the carbon dioxide and water in different combinations occurring depending on the state and the external influences on this particular equation. The other ones are proteins and phosphates, which contribute to some extent in maintaining the extracellular pH, but a big part of them also works as an intracellular buffer. So the same equation again, this is the most important one to maintain the normal body pH. The carbon dioxide is taken care of by the lungs. So anything that goes wrong there is called as respiratory acidosis. And on the extreme right of the equation is H plus and HCO3. This is the ionized form of carbonic acid dissociated, and this is what is taken care of by the kidneys. How does it do it? By reabsorbing all the bicarbonate that is filtered at the glomerular level, then excreting the excess of H plus at the distal nephron level, and ammonia production from the proximal tubules. So all these three things together is what helps maintain the pH, and this is called as and any abnormality in this system will cause acidosis, which is called as metabolic acidosis. Now, in the what is pertinent to CKD, the way you would define metabolic acidosis in CKD is by bicarbonate level, because essentially that is what has been used in studies, and that is the target to maintain a normal or close to normal pH. So in CKD, we call it metabolic acidosis when the bicarbonate level is less than 22. As we go on further, we'll realize that this is not a perfect definition. It's more of a convention, which generally is done for most of the clinical parameters so that they can be used for real practice. But in theory and in the pathogenesis of acidosis in CKD, we'll realize that this definition is actually far from perfect. Now, coming to the pathophysiology, how does metabolic acidosis in CKD occur? So firstly, looking at what causes an acid production, and that is because of the H plus that we take from the protein metabolism that happens in our body. And this is what contributes to H plus. So anything that adds an HCO3 or losses of HCO3 is also going to further add to acidosis. So that is what is the net acid production. So the imbalance of any of these things could cause an increased net acid production. So kind of imbalances that does occur in CKD is either an increased acid production, or there could be loss of bicarbonate or decreased acid excretion. Now, what are the factors that affect the endogenous acid production as such? A huge part of it is contributed by the quality and the quantity of diet. the amount of protein included in the diet, and also the type of protein. So a high protein diet contributes to a large net acid production, and a low protein diet with a lot of fruits and vegetables will do the opposite, that is low net acid excretion. Along with this, with whatever is the status of the patient, the endogenous acid-base milieu, the already present milieu, the kidney function, this is what additionally contributes to the net acid production. Now, mechanistically, how does this happen? Whenever kidneys are compromised, there are multiple compartments in the kidney that could be compromised. It could be a problem with one compartment, a combination, or all of them. So it could be a problem with filtration, where it could be reduced, or a loss of bicarbonate from the proximal tubule, reduced H+ secretion in the distal tubule, reduced excretion of ammonium, diminished excretion of titrable acid, especially phosphoric acid. This is important for patients who have been put on medical diets, that is renal diets, or on phosphate binders. In those cases, especially, this other capacity of the kidney, that is being able to buffer the titrable acid, also is compromised. Other than this, eventually, as the CKD advances, the acidotic uremic toxins are retained and they themselves contribute to metabolic acidosis. Finally, hyperkalemia is another thing that happens in CKD, which causes a redistribution of these H+ ions from the intracellular space to extracellular space. So that will reduce the pH of the blood and additionally contribute to acidosis. So as the stage of the CKD progresses, just a minute. As the stage of CKD progresses, generally the incidence of metabolic acidosis tends to increase from as low as 5 to 10% in early CKD stages, that is stage 1 and stage 2, to up to 20 to 30% in CKD5. But as we can see from these percentages, it's not invariably occurring in every patient, and there are multiple factors that can affect it. So what additional issues happen in dialysis patients? So these are patients with complete renal, we cannot technically call it complete renal failure, but they have, for practical purposes, renal failure and require a renal replacement therapy. So that is either in the form of hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis for most patients. And in these patients, what additionally happens is increased inflammation and an increased amount of endocrine disturbances. So this contributes to worsening acidosis. In case of hemodialysis, they would have days when they're getting dialyzed and their bicarb levels become better and they'll be less acidotic until the next session when their acid starts building up again. So there is a sawtooth pattern of acidosis in hemodialysis patients. While in peritoneal dialysis, if the patient opts for a continuous therapy, there is going to be a more or less steady correction of acidosis. This is very relevant in terms of outcomes because once the patients are on dialysis, the electrolyte disturbances and fluid shifts have a very big role to play in the survival of these patients. So how much is exactly contributed by acidosis is difficult to ascertain because it's a mix of all things. There are other metabolic disturbances also going, but definitely acidosis plays a big role. Now, we now have understood how the metabolic acidosis does happen, but what does it cause? Why should we be worried about it? It causes an increased muscle protein catabolism, which is essentially a negative nitrogen balance because proteins are not being built but are getting destroyed. And if the patient is deficient in their diet, then this is going to be enhanced even more. There is also increased activity of ATP-dependent ubiquitin proteasome and an increased activity of branched chain keto acid hydrogenase. So basically, all these are enzymes present in different cells, including cardiac cells, RBCs, etc. And they also additionally contribute to catabolism in these tissues. Other things that happen are reduced albumin synthesis, dysgeusia, or metallic sort of a taste in the mouth, or an altered taste. And there's also a generalized state of systemic inflammation that can happen in CKD per se, but metabolic acidosis has been shown to enhance the inflammatory markers. Also, the endocrine disorders, which are otherwise also present in CKD, but tend to get worse with acidosis. Acidosis per se can cause the disease to progress because acidosis causes increased ammonium production in the kidney, and that is an inflammatory, triggers an inflammatory cascade within the kidney, causing more fibrosis and hence causing progression of CKD and in the long run actually worsening metabolic acidosis. So all of these factors interact with each other and contribute to protein energy malnutrition in patients with kidney disease. So all this is beyond their dietary deficiency of protein. So these are the changes that are happening. They are not uniquely because of metabolic acidosis, but metabolic acidosis does play a huge part in causing all of these. There are other consequences which are relevant clinically, like malaise, osteopenia, reduced growth in children, a reduced respiratory reserve, and increased intercurrent illnesses. Intercurrent illnesses can actually superimpose more acidosis on the background chronic metabolic acidosis and CKD. An increased generation and release of beta-2 microglobulin, increased impaired myocardial contractility, and both hypotension and hypertension. Hypertension could be usually occurs in the scenario of acute severe acidosis, but the intercurrent illnesses can make the patient more prone to hypotension in case of CKD, as well as chronic acidosis can itself cause hypertension, along with hyperkalemia. So what eventually happens to these patients after these consequences? Eventually, if it's a severe metabolic acidosis, it is fatal by itself. If it is less severe, it is chronic. It can have several systemic complications, as we saw. And even if that is not the case, in the long run, the presence of chronic metabolic acidosis itself can contribute to mortality. So now coming to the management part, how do we manage metabolic acidosis and nutritional status as it is closely linked to protein energy malnutrition beyond dietary deficiency in CKD patients? So when do we start therapy for metabolic acidosis? At what stage of CKD or at what point of time in their disease course should these patients be considered for therapy? So the topmost line with blue boxes shows the different bicarbonate levels. 22 to 26 is what is considered as a normal pH or a normal bicarbonate concentration or an acceptable bicarbonate concentration. So the classical concept is that whenever it is less than 22, this is when the bicarb levels start falling, and this is probably when we should be starting their treatment. So this is a classical concept, and this is in concordance with the definition of metabolic acidosis as we saw earlier in the treatment or the management of CKD patients. However, there is an expanded concept that says that H+ retention actually starts even while the bicarbonate levels are in the normal range of 22 to 26. So this H+ retention is not reflecting in the bicarb levels. However, this is something that may have clinical consequences. Animal studies have shown that the total acid load in the body in the early CKD patients is also higher than what it should be. So this is what is the continuum. It's not something that suddenly transitions from a normal acid-base balance to an acidotic state. There is a phase where there is U bicarbonatemic state where there is a base generation which is occurring, but it is lesser than the acid generation, and hence the acid accumulation is occurring, but this tends to happen in the tissues, and so the blood pH and the blood bicarbonate level will actually be normal. This progresses on to a non-acidotic hypobicarbonatemia, which essentially means that the patient is non-acidotic by pH. You call something acidotic when the pH is affected. So at the stage 3, the pH is not yet affected. I mean stage 3 of this table. Can you see the cursor? Yeah. So here the pH is not affected yet. All that's happening is just a fall in bicarbonate level, and that would be apparent if you did an ABG for these patients. Finally, as the disease progresses and compensatory mechanisms cannot contain the pH, that is when acidemia develops, when there is a fall in pH, and hypobicarbonatemia persists at this level as well. What are the treatment options available? Alkali therapy and dietary management. So alkali therapy consists of bicarbonate tablets. They have some adverse effects, the most common being GI discomfort, because what essentially is done is alkali is given, it's inexpensive and it is easily available, but it will react with the acid that is present in the stomach and which can cause release of carbon dioxide and bloating. So patients generally complain of some GI discomfort, especially with increasing bicarbonate dose given to them, and it becomes ineffective as well as they're already neutralized. So enteric coated soft capsules are what might be an answer to this, but they're not widely available and not as cheap as the simple bicarbonate tablets. Another option is a Scholl's solution, which is sodium citrate. Citrate is converted by liver to bicarbonate in a 1:1 ratio. So that additionally could be given. But yes, the liver functions of the patients should be good for this to work. Finally, phosphate binders. So acetate, citrate, which are combined with calcium for chelation of phosphorus. Additionally, they will get converted in the body to bicarbonate, giving additional bicarbonate to the system. Sevelamer hydrogen chloride used to be one of the phosphate binders, but it dissociates to form chloride, which actually contributes to acidosis. So that's an exception, but the other ones do help in correcting somewhat the acidotic levels of CKD. Now, what dose to be given? The volume of distribution is 50% of the body weight. So you see what the deficit is and multiply it by the body weight. That will tell you the required HCO3. Unless it is severe or emergency, you don't need to correct it immediately. It's corrected slowly over 3 to 4 days. And it needs to be reassessed. Because once you achieve a steady state, the patient may not be requiring as high levels of bicarbonate, and we can reduce the adverse effects by decreasing the dose if that is permissible. Lastly, how often do we check? Not sure. Most people would do it once in a month. What are the possible adverse effects? GI intolerance, as we said. There could be overshoot alkalosis, and alkalosis also has bad clinical consequences. Hypertension, because usually these compounds are combined with sodium. Bicarb is compounded with sodium because we cannot give potassium, and potassium itself is not excreted in CKD, so that's not advisable. Giving sodium always runs the risk of worsening of hypertension, fluid retention, and hence the heart failure. But in clinical practice, it has been seen that sodium combined with bicarb is not as bad as sodium combined with chloride. So though salt restriction or salt in diet has a huge effect on hypertension and fluid, the same is not true with bicarb, and most people tend to tolerate it quite well. Lastly, if there is alkalosis, then it tends to precipitate calcium, and this could precipitate in the vessels and could worsen the disease, though there is not much evidence or studies for the same. The dietary management, finally. This is very important. The patient has to be an adequate diet. Animal proteins can be avoided, which generate more acid. Plant-based proteins are preferable. A fruit and vegetable-rich diet. So is it free of side effects? No, nothing is. But it has to be, if it's done in moderation, it would be the best. Monitoring for hyperkalemia, as well as protein energy malnutrition that can develop of the changes that are made in the diet, if they are monitored and accounted for, and the therapy is changed accordingly, it is the best and the easiest way to take care of chronic metabolic acidosis. 2 more minutes. The protein intake in CKD, when it is high protein, then it can cause increased mortality and morbidity. The same is true about a protein deficient diet. Both of them can cause worse outcomes. Hence, adequate protein intake is essential. This should be the message. Just decreasing protein to reduce metabolic acidosis is absolutely deleterious. Metabolic acidosis in a way is a marker of how much the body is metabolizing. So if somebody is not producing acid, doesn't mean that they're doing good. It could be that they're having very bad protein energy malnutrition and they would actually do bad. So these are a couple of
Dr. Smita, would you please wind up your talk?
Yeah, sure,
yeah,
sir.
I think we are running behind schedule. Yeah, we'll need to wind up.
Yeah, so this is the last slide. Thank you for allotting me a few extra seconds there. So metabolic acidosis can be fatal. Subclinical also is bad. It is associated with malnutrition and protein energy wasting. It's a continuum. Alkali therapy is readily available, but dietary therapy is what is ideal and should be started early. Thank you for your patience.